Even a child is known by his doings, whether his work is pure and whether it be right. That's Proverbs 20:11. Even a child can be known by what they do, whether it is pure and good or right. Now, I have a story today. Now, I know this story, and it makes me laugh every time I read it. And I think you're going to laugh too. Now, how many of you know what a raccoon looks like? Okay, what does it look like? What helps you to know that it's a raccoon when you see one?
Great.
It has two things that are that stand out. Who can think of what stands out that lets you know that it's a raccoon? Okay. Well, one of the first things you notice when you see it from afar, it's got different colors in its tail. It's got a long, fluffy tail, alternating like black or brown and white. And that when you see the alternating colors on its tail, you know, oh yeah, I think that's a raccoon. And when you come up close and you look at its face, you say, oh yes, that's a raccoon. Because it looks as if it's wearing a black mask. It looks like a robber or a thief. And you know what? Sometimes they are robbers and thieves. If you don't tie down the stuff in your yard, they will get in your garbage and in your trash, and they'll make a big mess looking for food. So you know it's a raccoon by two things. It wears a black mask, and it has different colors on its tail in rings, okay? All right. Now, there was a ranger. Now, a ranger is a guy who works, or woman who works for the forest department or the national parks, and they're called rangers. And this ranger, let's say his name is Dan. They didn't tell me his name. He found a baby raccoon whose mother had died. And it was very tiny. And if Dan didn't take care of it, it was going to die. So he took it home to where he lived in the park, and he raised it. Now, how do you learn what to do? Your mom and your dad teach you what to do as you're growing up, right? Well, it's the same thing with raccoons. They learn what to do by what their mother teaches them. But this raccoon had no mother. And so Dan said, well, I'm going to have to teach it what to do so it can survive out in the forest, okay? Because he wasn't going to keep it because it's a wild animal. But he had to teach it how to live before he could let it loose into the forest again. Now, you know, raccoons are considered very smart animals. They're very, very smart. And this raccoon was learning all that Dan was teaching it, how to eat its food, how to get about. And when Dan wasn't giving it lessons, he was still looking at all the things that Dan was doing. He was watching him when he worked in the kitchen. He was watching him when he was working outside. He even watched him when he was in the bathroom, brushing his teeth or taking a bath. Now, as the summer went on, there were a lot of people in the park. It was a big park. And there were over 2,000 people who were visiting this particular week, and also the people that worked there. Now, somebody came, he was very annoyed, came to the station to make a complaint. He says, when I turned the tap on the sink in my cabin, I'm not getting any water. And the fellow behind the counter said, well, he knew, he had just checked the tank that morning, and he knew there was water, but, you know, he wasn't going to yell at this person. This person was complaining he had no water. So he said, I'll check. So even though he knew that there was water in the tank, but they had a big tank up on the hill, which water was pumped into it from a well, and he knew he checked it this morning and the tank was almost full. And he went to the man's house, his cabin, and he turned the spigot and it was just no water. And he had it open all the way. So he said, okay, we're going to go check the tank. So they went up the hill, he and another ranger, and they checked the tank. And you know, when the tank is full and you tap it, it sounds solid. But when it's empty, it sounds like a drum. And he tapped the tank and it was boom, boom. He says, how can the tank be empty? I just checked it this morning. There must be a leak somewhere. There must be a hole in a pipe somewhere, and all the water is running out. So we're going to have to find that leak. So he called the other rangers, and they went off in pairs, checking all the pipelines that came out from the tank, because water was still coming in the tank, but the water was going out somewhere. So the rangers went off in pairs, and two rangers happened to pass by the cabin where Dan lived. And Dan was at work, but his little friend, the raccoon, was at home. And as the two men were walking past the cabin, they heard like somebody had flushed the toilet. And they had an old-fashioned toilet that didn't have a handle, but it had a pull. And he said, we know Dan is not home. And then they heard it again. And they started to walk toward the house. They heard it again. So they ran to the cabin and they opened the door and went to the bathroom. And what do you think they saw? The raccoon was learning everything that Dan was teaching it. But it was also learning by watching what Dan was doing. And whenever Dan went into the bathroom and he finished, Dan flushed the toilet. And he liked that sound. And he saw the water swirling every time the chain was pulled. So this day he decided he was going to have some fun. You know, raccoons like to play. They like to have fun. And so he pulled the chain, and the water came swirling down, and he jumped in. Just as he would if he was in the wild, he would jump into a river or a stream to have some fun. And when the water stopped swirling, he jumped out of the toilet and pulled the chain again, so that more water would come down, and he jumped in again and started swimming around. He was having fun, but he didn't realize his fun was costing everybody else their water. Because he was having so much fun, everybody was not having fun, and they were not getting water. You know, sometimes we play games and we do things because it's fun. God likes us to have fun. But he doesn't like us to have fun that makes somebody else unhappy. Now, the raccoon was innocent. He didn't realize what he was doing was making other people uncomfortable. Because he had emptied the tank, they couldn't wash their dishes. They couldn't take a shower. They didn't have water to cook with. They didn't have water to drink. because he was having so much fun. He didn't realize he was wasting water. He was just doing what raccoons do. And sometimes we have fun, and we don't realize sometimes our fun can be making other people unhappy. So let us be careful what we do and make sure that what we do is pleasing to our parents, is pleasing to God, and doesn't make anybody else unhappy.